Welcome back to Frankly Speaking. I'm your host, Frank. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight I want to do something special, a little different. I want to introduce you to somebody very special in my life, and that's right here, right here. You see this little cute little puppy? You see this cute little face guy right here? This is my dog. He's a beagle. His name is Lorenzo. He has an Italian name, right? And I have concluded through my short time that I've had Lorenzo, I got him back at the end of January. I've had him now with 3 months, a little over 3 months now. I have concluded that my dog Lorenzo is a fascist. Yes, he is a fascist. You know why? Because he breaks my balls constantly. And in America, anybody that breaks your balls, anybody you disagree with, anybody that you may be in conflict with and believes robs you of your own personal liberties is a fascist, right? My dog Lorenzo is a fascist. I have a fascist dog, right? So here we go. I did a cast last week, or a few days ago actually, on the Elon Musk buyout of Twitter. And it's interesting because I go both after the left and the right, like I normally do here. A little bit harder after the right because I think the right's a little confused in sort of this, in the midst of a political system that has gone haywire in America, where the left perpetually wins. But in this, cast that I talked about, essentially I watched Tucker afterwards, and Tucker, I think, was watching my show, to be honest with you. But he brought up the point that I did in my last cast. How has the political right in America gone from we the people to all of a sudden now Elon Musk buying out Twitter to save democracy in America, right? I mean, how's it come to that? Is Elon Musk the last hope for free speech? Is Elon Musk the last hope for the Constitution of the United States? And we got right-wingers cheering this on. Is it a desperate attempt by the right? Is that all they have left? Has it really come to this in America? Let's remember, like I said in that last podcast, the political right has been arguing since the last election, 2020 election, particularly with the social media blockade of conservative voices, including President Donald J. Trump and other conservative voices, that a fascistic takeover of social media and the media has taken place in America. And this alliance between big corporations and the government has taken place, AKA fascism in America. And yet, here we have a situation where the right is cheering on a big corporatist to buy out Twitter. So the corporatist is going to save America from oligarchical corporatist rule. So according to the standards of the political right, are we now using fascism to solve the problem of fascism in America? Because that's what it seems like at this point. See, because the word no longer means anything. Right? We have two political ideologies that really indiscriminately throw the word at each other back and forth. And yet, can most people even cite or proclaim one known fascist? How many do you know? No, really, how many fascists, proclaimed fascists do you know? I know we have lots of classical liberals on the right side. I know we have lots of communists on the left side. And that's been the war really since the end of World War II. It's been between classical liberals and communists, or the heirs of Russia, as we Catholics like to cite. Now, I find that interesting because it's been a one-way war, right? As the heirs of Russia, as Our Lady talked about, would encompass the West eventually at some point. And that's really what we've seen, right? As post-Enlightenment society, particularly after World War II, the West has gone deeper and deeper into leftism and something that looks like some form of quasi-Marxism, which includes America now at this point in history. And our friends in the political right really have no answers to this problem now, other than doubling down on what they know, classical liberal ideology, thump, Constitution, which is fine. We can respect the Constitution, but we also have to acknowledge when things are not working and things are going wayward. And this is where we are now, right? In an American nation that is, it's lost politically, it's lost culturally. The family's in a state of absolute turmoil. I talked about in that last cast how conservatives really have this problem with freedom and doing what is right oftentimes. If freedom contradicts true justice, there's this clash for the right that exists. Some will side with this purest freedom notion. Some would say, well, this purest freedom notion is a problem because these issues that we clash with bring about problems. One of the ones I always talk about is the problem of pornography in America, where you have on one side the Glenn Becks and the Bishop Shapiros who would tell you, listen, pornography is bad, it's damaging to young men, it's damaging to women, it's damaging to culture, it causes mental instability, it's the rotting out of our culture and our civilization and our soul. But in the name of freedom and liberty, we have to allow porn to exist. Because once you go down the path of censorship, government censorship, then it's a full-blown leap toward Marxism and communism and full government control. But isn't that where America's been headed anyway for the past 100 years? I mean, let's be honest here. And what do you do about the social fabric of the country? I mean, look at America today. The culture is rotten to the core. The family's broken beyond belief. And as a result of those two factors, the government's corrupt as can be. Government has problems there. Let's put it that way. You don't solve this without moral justice. You don't. I know we all want to be good libertarians in the Republican Party, right? Republicans have never gotten over getting their asses handed to them, all during that Bill Clinton, Monica Lewinsky affair, where they figured out that a morally degenerate, morally broken American populace since the 1960s, they could not get over the fact that, oh my goodness, this guy committed adultery and they don't care. They don't care. I see, this is what happens ultimately in the end. Character matters, right? As long as he does a good job, as long as the economy is booming in America, that's all we care. That's all we ask for in a president. We don't care who he's screwing, whether he's using his power against inferior employees or anything like that anymore, right? The economy is good. My housing prices, stock market. Let's make the money in America, the economic engine of prosperity. That's what matters in America. But as a result of that, we see now 67 years of the sexual revolution, all the chaos that has brought. You know, the breakdown of the family, the breakdown of culture, breakdown of everything. And of course, we're not supposed to talk about that because we're all good libertarians now, especially on the right? Nobody wants to fight the culture war anymore. And then we wonder why government goes wayward, why we see corruption, why we see all this disorder, why we see at the end of it all of our precious freedoms and liberties robbed from us as Americans to where we have nothing left. See, you can't separate the social order from the economic order or the political order. It all goes hand in hand. If you're going to have social disorder at the familial level, at the cultural level, that's only going to descend into the political level and eventually the economic level as well, too. As we see an economy now that, well, we got issues, right? Whether it's debt, whether it's a recession on the horizon, whether it's inflation and the middle class being crushed more than ever before, this is all interrelated with one another, right? But again, we've taken that libertarian approach in that respect. And so, you know, so then we have a political right that becomes desperate as they lose political power, because see, that social disorder has gone to the top of our civilization. It's gone up into the corporations, and the corporations have chosen sides. And for classical liberals who are seeing the devolution of classical liberalism, the disease, or should I say, that which gives birth to the progressives, their own ideology, now they need an excuse to save face. And fascism, the word fascism, has become that excuse for them. When in fact, what we do know about fascism, very short-lived in Italy, was that it had a greater social order. It wasn't just power for the sake of power per se. It wasn't just this collusion between government and big business. Because if that is the definition of fascism, then America was the first fascist nation, because nobody grew in regards to corporatism and industry as much as America did, right? Remember, Italy was very artisan, very agricultural. The fishing industry was huge. Of course, it's a continent, or a nation, I should say, surrounded by the ocean, by the Mediterranean. But when you look at massive industries, America was dominated by. right? Whether it was the Carnegie Halls or the steels or, the steel manufactured and everything that brought about. Italy never had a massive industry, right? When World War II broke out, Mussolini turned to what? Fiat, the car company, to help manufacture his war machine. Who did Americans turn to? Franklin Roosevelt turned to Henry Ford, right? Those nations worked with what they had. But as far as industrialized nation and really the influence of big business and corporations, you can make an argument that big business in America has always had a lot of influence, more than Italy, more than Spain, more than the other European nations of the time. In fact, Italy's infrastructure in regards to corporations was very small. They didn't have a whole lot. They had a few, don't get me wrong, they had a few, but nothing like we saw in America, right? Because in America, it was about, again, the free market without any social moral order. It was about you make the money for the sake of money, right? Classical liberals argue we got this competitive nature within man, and the way we kind of subside man's fallen nature is by unleashing the economic engine of prosperity. If you make the money and I make the money, we all live in happiness and in harmony, and we live a happy life. And of course, it's been the opposite. That principle has collapsed on its face, and many conservatives now are shaking their heads. What happened to America? I don't know what happened to America. This is the America I know. Yeah, well, you opted out of the moral order, the social order. You opted out of the truth of Jesus Christ, Christ the King, for these abstract, indifferent forms of religion. And that's why the left has beat the right all these years, is because while the right was focused on prosperity and the economic engine of prosperity, the left said, go ahead, go for it. We don't care about that. We're going to exploit man's fallen nature. We have no true religion. We have no sacramentalism. We have no true church in place. You want to go with this, again, indifferent approach for religion. You do you, I do me. As long as we don't cross each other's property lines, we don't shoot each other, fine. But that's not true religion. That's not true social order. It was only a matter of time till all the grand revolutions with the society really unleashed itself, right? The sexual revolution, you can say 1960s, but we really begin to see it right after the Industrial Revolution, 1920s and 30s, right? You got Protestant churches that begin to relent on contraception, things like that. I mean, the sexual revolution is really marching through all of the, the 20th century for that matter. While in Europe, it wasn't quite that way. It eventually happened after World War II, but that is because the presence of democracy is imposed on many of those nations, starting with Italy, right? See, this is what I said. I have exposure to both worlds. Listen, I'm born and raised in America. I'm a proud American, but I also have exposure to not only Italian culture, but old world Italian culture, which I'm very proud of as well, too. And many of us saw this coming down the pipe. And a lot of these ideas of the sexual revolution that America went through in the 60s, there was pockets of Italy never went through that, specifically in Italy, which was very devout, very religious. The church had its role. But in America, where, we did this whole separation of church and state thing, where we personalized moral codes and really made a mockery out of religion, yeah, the natural fruition was the unleashing of man's fallen nature. While in certain parts of, Europe and other Catholic nations, that was tempered until democracy creeped its head into those nations, right? Then democracy presents a lot of problems. It brings liberalism with it and a whole host of problems. That's why I said, I was never introduced or never witnessed or lived through the concept of the sexual revolution in my home. It didn't happen in our Sicilian families. It was all an American thing for us, right? It's why I talked about this before. It's like, when I started going to grammar school, right, my parents immigrated here in 1964, right? So I was born here. And when I started going to grammar school in the late 70s, early 80s, it was odd and strange how the concept of family in America was so much different than the concept of family with Italians. And not just Italians, but Croatians and Hispanics who were also heavily Catholics. And I would go to school and the non-Catholic kids, right, the white Protestants and kids like that, their families were structured different. Not only were they small families, but they were divorced, most of them. They had this thing about, okay, I spend the weekends with mom and or with dad, and we have two families kind of thing. That was foreign, because for me, when I was a kid, the Italian families, especially those that were first generation, those families were intact. We're Catholics. We didn't believe in divorce, right? Same with the Croatians, same with the Hispanics. Now, multi-generational generations later, that begins to hit those families because liberalism with the sort of the American way of life hits those families, right? And so now that we're in the second generation now, and now with third, with my kids' generation, yeah, that liberalism creeps in, the divorces, the broken families, the illegitimacy, the disordered life, that all plays effect on that strand, right? Because liberalism becomes the dominant god of our time. And that's why what the old world was sheltered from when it was dominated more by the church, by the Catholic Church, specifically in these conservative parts of the world, like Sicily, like parts of Spain, even the Philippines and South America. It's when democracy and liberalism creeps in and presents liberalism, this rebellion against truth, this rebellion against the church, this rebellion against the faith, this rebellion against the 2,000-year analogy of the faith, this rebellion against sacred tradition, that these societies begin to falter morally, right? And that's the one thing that I noticed that I was a kid that I still find strange, and out to this day when I look across at my Protestant friends and they tell me, well, you don't want to be stuck in a bad marriage, you're going to be miserable. Marriage is a covenant from God, right? And it really feeds into that notion that, well, if you can divorce yourself from the church, then why wouldn't you eventually see a justification of divorce from your wife or from your family? And that's what we've seen in America, right? The liberation. And I've talked about it before, how Americans, how another thing we view strange about America, how the family in and of itself is a perpetual state of revolution, where kids are always rebelling against their parents, which is something different from the old Catholic world, right? Where we were taught to honor our mother and our father. Of course, right there in 10 Commandments, right? It's a dictate that we follow. It's not a revolutionary spirit. But in America, it's different. It's a constant revolution, even within the family. Hey, mom and dad, I'm 18, kiss my ass. I'm going to do what I want to do. It's time to go to college, sex, drugs, rock and roll. And then I'm going to make the money. And that's what matters in America. So there's these paradigm shifts. There's these concepts that are foreign and different. And in that respect, you know, when it comes to America and looking at the world, the old world, and other parts of the world, some of those ideas are a threat to America, right? Because we rebelled. We had a new way in America, right? We have manifest destiny, the last great hope for mankind, shining city in the hill. We were setting new moral standards and new moral dictates, but the world has become unraveled under those ideas. And there's many of us questioning whether those ideas, well, you know, what were they, right? Were they true divine providence, or were they just man-made ideas at the end of the day that are all faltering? It's interesting. I was watching Mark Levin tonight talking about the idea of nationalism, how the founding fathers of America never incorporated the idea of nationalism. They incorporated the idea of Americanism, right? Because nationalism implies a big government. Okay, fine, but America's government has grown since the founding. You could argue that America's government is arguably the biggest government in the history of the world today. Now, you may appeal back to your, again, utopian mythology of the way the country's supposed to be, but that's not how you guys judge the old world, right? You guys judge it based upon its merits at the end of the day and the end conclusion that you made. Well, we're going to do the same thing here with America, don't we? Only to be fair, if we're going to use a reasonable line of argument, what has America devolved into? What has liberalism, the concept of liberty, devolved the West into, right? It's like I keep saying, name me one nation post-Enlightenment that hasn't succumbed to the errors of Russia, AKA, you know, Marxism, communism, whatever you want to call it now, right? It's not fascism that's dominating the world, it's communism. But see, it's an interesting thing with this word fascism that's been thrown around by classical liberals. And I keep saying it, they're throwing it around because they're desperate to defend what they believe, because classical liberal ideology is devolving, you know? So, you know, it's one of those things that, you know, my friends on the right, listen, I'm going to agree with you about 80% of the time. And in all honesty, I admire you guys because we agree on a lot of things. But I think at some point you guys have to acknowledge that we're here now. You guys have to step back from this utopian mythology that you've created in your own mind. What are we now and why are we there? You want to blame your progressive siblings? You want to blame the Marxists? Fine. I would just argue they're your offspring. They've taken your ideas of liberalism and taken them to the most logical conclusion. And why do we say that? Because the whole world has been encompassed by this, the errors of Russia, ultimately, and communism and Marxism. The threat wasn't fascism per se. Fascism wasn't good. It was disordered, right? It was a disordered reaction to liberalism because people were trying to figure out in Europe where we're going to go next. Remember, those Western European nations were being attacked on both sides. You had communists to the east, you had classical liberals to the west, and fascism was a disordered, contrived ideology to try and protect themselves from what it considered to be their enemies, which was basically any ideology of the Enlightenment, particularly the French Revolution, right? What really united those fascist nations, even though only Italy was fascist, was the idea that we're anti-French Revolution. And it was America that sided with those principles. Some would say, no. The American Revolution was different. Listen, the principles were there, okay? Especially when you see the likes of Thomas Jefferson that supported the French Revolution. He's on record. There's letters on record supporting that. Now, they may not like how it went down, but it was fundamentally different because in France, you had 1,000 years of Catholicism you had to root out. And as we know, good leftists, you know what? When you got to change human nature, that means killing a few million people. That's what we've seen throughout the history of leftism, wherever it's governed, right? So, I mean, you give me this stuff about, well, the French Revolution, the American Revolution were different only because of circumstances. Admittedly, they went crazy in France, unlike the American Revolution, but it didn't have to happen in America that way because America was never fundamentally Catholic, right? Where France, it was. You had to root out the Catholic Church. You had to force submission on those people. See, circumstances matter. It's another thing that classical liberals never want to deal with. They only want to deal with the utopian. They only want to deal with a mythology that fits everything. That's why with this mythology, we can't get past the notion that the left has won and that the country has been going to the left since 1776, right? And the last gasp effort is we gotta fight, we gotta vote harder. Listen, we've all been voting hard. We all worked the campaigns. We've all tried to make changes in America. I remember being a young Republican when I was at classical liberal camp back in 99, 2000. I was out 1, 2, 3 in the morning putting George W. Bush signs out all over with Riverside County in California, pushing for the Bush presidency because, hey, he was going to end Roe v. Wade. He was going to bring in limited government. He was going to bring in prosperity. He's going to bring it all, right? Right? Because Republicans, we're conservatives. We vote. And we won. Or did we win? What do we get from George W. Bush? A big kick in the balls? That's pretty much it. Excuse my language, but that's what it feels like here. You know, some 22, 23 years later, whatever it's been. And you look at the Bushies today, you know, they side with the left more than they do with the right. And who was the candidate after that? Oh, that's right, John McCain. Oh, yeah. Another guy I'm sure was a conservative, right? Oh, who's the candidate? Oh, Mitt Romney, right? You guys on the right are lost. You guys got to stop looking at the mythology. You guys got to look at reality on the ground and why this has gone wrong. And quite frankly, screaming and yelling fascism, fascism, fascism only dilutes the word to the point where it has no meaning. I mean, the bottom line is that if corporations are the enemy because it's a fascistic takeover, then America is just as guilty of that as any other nation in the history of the world. I know you want to believe in the mythology that it was all rosy back 75, 100 years ago, right? Those corporations were all playing by the rules. Those corporations were honest, right? They were living the American dream, free markets. Oh, really? Look at some of the monopoly laws they had to pass back then. The corporations, the powerful, the oligarchs, the elites, they've never played by the rules. They've always favored themselves. You could sell yourselves on this mythology thing all you want, but let's remember, like I said on my last show, what is the greatest critique of democracy? Is that it lends itself to oligarchical rule. It lends itself to elites ruling, right? In the old world, the only thing that stopped the rise of the elites was the monarch, and that monarch could do that because the average person could go to the monarch and make his claim for injustice. Can we do that today? Can I get a letter to President Joe Biden or even one of the senators, right? Oh, I'm sure I could get it. I'm sure I could send an email off to my local senator or local congressman, but what effect does that really have, right? Not much at the end of the day, because he's just one of many. Represented government, like I said before, it's never represented my values. I've seen everything in my lifetime crushed, everything that I believe, everything that I love, everything that I cherish, everything that I hold sacred. It's all been wiped out in the name of representative democracy. Why? Because my neighbor to my left, my neighbor to my right, and my neighbor across the street all go to the polls and gang up on me. That's what they do. That's what I see my whole life from representative government. Does that mean I'm against it completely as an integralist? No, I want to work with the system, but there's a few basic principles we have to get right. Starting with proclaiming truth, religious truth, start proclaiming that Christ is our God and our King, something that in the American founding is kind of silent, to be honest with you, in a lot of different ways. But if we don't acknowledge eternal truth in the church and the sacraments of God, well, that's going to lead to a lot of great disorder. This is why we've seen a great moral disorder really since the Enlightenment, because we abandoned Holy Mother Church, we abandoned the sacraments. You could talk about the old world and come to your conclusions all you want, but we never saw this kind of moral disorder at the cultural and familial level. Granted, there's ebbs and flows in society. There was, the Renaissance was kind of chaotic, but from everything we understand studying history and read a lot of mystics, what they've revealed to us, this is the most immoral time in the history of human civilization since the great flood of Noah. That's something you got to consider. It's very important. And the family and the culture have been absolutely rotted out. And when that happens, like I said before, the political system is going to follow. I mean, if America's at a place now, and I am hearing this more and more from conservatives, where things just don't make sense anymore, well, you made a hard conclusion on the old world the way you wanted to. How about I conclude the same? That it's been liberalism, post-Enlightenment society that has brought the world and the West to its knees. And now it's crumbling under the weight of liberalism, democracy, republicanism, and Enlightenment principles. Why wouldn't we make that conclusion, right? Other than hopium, right? Other than the mythology that we believe in like a religion. And I think that's the ultimate problem. Love your country, yes. We should love America. We should defend her. We should be ready to die for her at any given moment. It's the land of our birth. It is the land that we were born in. It's the land that we're going to raise a family. It's the land we're going to be buried in. It's the land I'm going to die in ultimately. But at the end of the day, America is not God. There's only one true God, and that is Jesus Christ, to the blessed Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And it's something as Americans, we've never truly acknowledged, not in a deep and meaningful way, not with these personal moral codes, not with this religious indifferentism. Until we start to acknowledge certain eternal truths, none of this is coming together. There's no election that's going to save us, right? There's none of this. And screaming fascism, fascism, fascism to a point where the word doesn't mean anything anymore, it's a waste of time. And the word loses its meaning. And I'm tired of conservatives saying that when they don't know what they're talking about. They don't understand historical fascism. In fact, well, they don't even understand historical classical liberalism because they only view it from their own, again, prism. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, my dog is a fascist. You know why? He pisses me off. Yeah, Lorenzo. He's even got an Italian name, Lorenzo, right? Clear fascist, right? All right, ladies and gentlemen. This is Frank signing off for Frank Speaking. Good night, everybody.